Okay, it says we're live. I'm going to double check. Facebook is always a tiny bit behind you and I. And here we are. Hello. Welcome to episode 19 of the Practical Magic Show. We're here with Mark Levy today. We are going to be uncovering the magic behind identifying what only you can do to create a global impact. And there is no one better for us to be speaking to than Mark Levy. He's a differentiation expert. I'm going to throw in here the father of social magic into that. And someone who's literally impacted hundreds of millions of lives. Mark, I described you as the man behind the curtain, the master behind the master, the mentor behind the minds. And so I am excited to have you here because, you know, for me, magic is kind of two different things. It's thinking outside the norm. And then the benefit of that is creating really incredible things in the world, whether they're incredible just because they feel magical, or in your case, they're incredible because they are literally having continuous and ever expanding exponential global impact. And so I told you before the show, I'm excited to have you here. And I love the way you think. I love the way you think. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I think an interesting thing based on what you're saying and your show, because I've listened to some of your excellent episodes, is people should know that, yes, I'm a differentiation expert for businesses or so, but we're talking about magic. But I'm also literally a magician. There's a well, that's a rabbit over on the other side. So that's anyway. But I have a background both as a business person on differentiating people so that their brands and ideas have reached hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. But also I have a background as a magician that I've created magic tricks and shows that have been on New York stage and Las Vegas stage and TV shows, the highest rated live show in New York City on TripAdvisor, 21-year running show, Chamber Magic, a demonstration of modern conjuring. So that was a show that I co-created. Mm-hmm. So it's this idea of I think that's why you thought of me. You know, it was the idea like, yeah, I do cool stuff in my business, but I also, the fact that I create magic tricks actually influences how I go about doing the business work that I do.
Oh, I'm excited to hear more about that because I didn't know that. I mean, I feel like, yeah, that's really exciting. So can you talk a little bit, I guess, first I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what is a differentiation expert and how is that, because my experience of meeting you was that it's not about discovering like, what do you do that better than everybody else? It's so much more precise than that. And I'd love to hear how you weave magic into that, like actual magic.
All right. I'm going to have to make something up now because I would have said, oh yeah, it's how you do something better than everyone else. But it's much more than that.
More precise. Like you explained it to me that it's what only you do.
Yeah. So your differentiation, right, is the thing that's going to make you stand out in a crowded marketplace so that people think of you ahead of other people. And an interesting idea with differentiation is that at its best, the idea that you're differentiating your business around or your book or whatever it is that you're creating needs to be less about who you are and more about the impact that your audience will have in their own lives, even after you're gone. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that it can't be about you. Like it's important that you're tied into this idea, but you really need to think about what can people do after meeting you or working with you or using your product that they couldn't do before meeting you. So it's about them and what they're doing, right? So that's a super important part of it. Did that answer it a little?
Yeah, it answered it. It's massive. I get the importance of that distinction because I think, at least I can only ever speak for myself, but if you think about differentiating, especially in the world where your business and your brand are kind of pretty closely linked to you, right? You're not selling a product, you're kind of the brand. It can be easy to fall into the trap of how it being about you. And actually listened to an interview you did. It was on your Facebook page, but I can't remember who it was with. And you said something that I thought was great. You said, I didn't say it was the best book of all time. I didn't say it was the best written book of all time. I told you this is how it's different. And that I think is pretty, even that is differentiating.
Oh, yeah.
Branding.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I wouldn't say that thought is uniquely mine. I certainly didn't create it. It's just not a common thought. People don't hear it much. It's the idea of to differentiate in a powerful way. You don't necessarily have to be better. You just have to be different so that you stand out. Being better and different is best, but being, so it's the idea, if you think about SUVs, the first SUV was kind of a response to differentiate from cars. But then that category was taken. Like the leader in SUVs own that designation, that category. So now you had to have the best-selling SUV in Germany, the best-selling SUV in Japan, the best-selling SUV for families. You know what I mean? Like they diced up the categories so that whoever was tops in that category, it's like, oh yeah, we're documented as selling more to families SUVs than any other. Like, so we're gonna call out that category now. So they made up a category that they could own so that they stood out. You know, does that make sense? And so that's the idea. So being the best-selling SUV for families does not mean that you're the highest quality SUV. It just means you're the best-selling SUV for families. So that's what it is. So being different is perhaps even more important, right? That's the point I was making. Yeah.
Which I like, because, there's this idea of uniqueness, which is we're all people, and for the most part, we're quite similar. A lot of us do similar kinds of work, but there's something different about you.
Yeah, well, and a key point, there's a lot of different categories that you can use to differentiate yourself around. One of my favorite categories, we were talking about it before we went on the air, has to do with your backstory as a means of differentiation, because your backstory is really one thing that cannot be copied, and people make sense of the world through story. Like that's how, because the world's very complex and millions of pieces of information are being thrown at us at any one time. And so when you think through story, it's kind of like you pick 5 of these million things and you make a line from this to this to this. You know what I mean? It's like the stars, the Big Dipper or something. Like you say, oh yeah, this is the world to me. You've picked out 5 stars out of a million and you link them together, and that's a story. And so we think in stories, we communicate in stories, we share in stories, we live our lives through story, we tell ourselves stories, we tell other people's stories. So an example in differentiating through story, a couple of months ago, so I live on this wonderful 18th century farm in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And I wanted to get a full house generator in, right? I just wanted to get a generator. I've always had generators in my house in case power ever goes out. And so I had this guy come over whose family owned this generator company. And I had him scoping things out. And he asked me, what do you do for a living? And I told him, he said, can I ask you for some business advice? I said, sure. I said, I'm starting a side business. And he said, I want to know how I can make it work. He said, my side business is this, right? Our main business is selling generators. Our side business, though, I want to sell hops to microbreweries and craft breweries. And I said, okay, that's a very specific and very different. Why do you want to do that? He said, oh, because my family, we actually own a farm of like 100 acres in the area. And we've always been farmers. But, my dad and I started this generator business like 20 years ago, but we've always been farmers previously. And I have these 2 little girls, my daughters. And rather than just like they're always on their computers, on their cell phones, so what I wanted to do was I wanted to show them that we all grew up as farmers in this family, and I wanted to bond with them about something other than like a video game. So he said, so we picked out an acre, or however much. And so my daughters and I dug this long 100-foot ditch, and we planted hops, and then they'd run out watering the hops, and they'd talk about which one was growing and which wasn't. And the hops grew, and they loved it so much that we built another 100-foot row and whatnot. And I started to brew beer from it. And that I liked it so much that I said, this should be a business of ours. And I said, okay, great. I said, that's your differentiation. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, these breweries, these microbreweries and crafts breweries and all these things, a lot of them are family owned. Mm-hmm. So you need to go to them and say, look, we're here, we're local, we want to sell you the hops. Here's why we grow the hops. Mm-hmm. We're a family that's been in farming for hundreds of years, and I didn't want to lose that. Even though that we have another business, I didn't want to lose that. I want my family to know where they came from. And I also wanted my daughters, I wanted to bond with them and not just over electronics. So we went out one day and built a 100-foot ditch, and we planted hops and blah, blah, blah. And so and we built another row and another row and another row. So this is the hops that I use to remind my daughters who they are and where they came from, and to bring us closer together. And I said, that's your story. That's, makes sense.
It makes so much sense. It makes so much, and it's, again, I love hearing and seeing the way you see the world, because it's precise, it's so exact. So what has people not see their own differentiation? Why is it helpful to have somebody outside of you see that?
Yeah, some people could see it. You may not need an outsider, but the difference is that an outsider not only sees your life more objectively, but they understand the strategies behind differentiation and about how to make your differentiation, what's meaningful to your audience and who your audience is, and what's going to get them excited. What are they going to talk about even after you've gone? That's super important. A story really quick. Let's see, that one. Millionaire's Magician. There he is. So he's the star of Chamber Magic, the show that I co-created, and I differentiated Steve's brand. He's the Millionaire's Magician, entertainment for exclusive events. As a matter of fact, here's a book that just came out about the show and about Steve. It's look at this, a very dramatic photo of Steve. So anyway, this is about the show. It's run, for 21 years in New York City. And when the show began, Steve and I created all the tricks together. We co-created them, and Steve would perform them. And then afterwards I would go into the audience and I'd speak to people. It wasn't a formal focus group. I'd do it informally. I'd say, I'm from the show and I'm just interested. What was your favorite trick? And I'd listen to people describe the trick to me. And if they described a trick, we did this over the course of weeks and weeks and months. If they described a trick to me, that's awesome. But if they never talked about a specific trick, all the different people I spoke to, if a trick was never mentioned, what Steve and I would do, we'd pull the trick out of the show, and we'd retool the trick and try to make the trick more amazing or stronger, or we would cut it out of the show entirely and put in a different trick, because the tricks themselves had to be the show. So they made up the show. That was the product. Mm-hmm. But they were also had to be emissaries for the show. They were all little marketers who had to go out into the world and get people excited about the show. The tricks had to be so memorable that people would want to talk about them even after they'd seen the show, to their friends and their neighbors and on Facebook and whatnot. And so that people would want to see those tricks themselves. And so if people weren't talking about a trick, it wasn't doing its job. Mm. And by the way, if people were talking about a trick, if people were talking about a trick, but they weren't talking about it clearly, it wasn't doing its job, because I knew if they couldn't talk to me about it in a clear way right after seeing it, they wouldn't have been able to talk about it to their friends later on. And in which case they wouldn't have talked about it, because we don't want to look stupid to other people. So they have to be clear about it. There's a famous magician from the 20th century. His name was Dai Vernon, or Day Vernon, depends how you want to pronounce it. And Vernon said, confusion is not magic. That if people are confused by what happens during a trick, even if they're amazed, they won't be astonished. Like, it'll rob them of that visceral feeling, because they're thinking, well, maybe I just didn't like fully understand what was supposed to happen. So to me, that idea is so important with tricks, and it's important with people's brands and what they're doing. It has to be so simple and so clear that people are excited to talk about it even when you're not around, and it's clear enough for them to talk about it, so that, right? So by the way, if people in chamber magic, if they were talking to us and it wasn't clear what the trick was about, Steve and I would try to retool the trick so that the premise of the trick was clearer, so that people could just easily say, oh yeah, X happened, rather than saying, oh yeah, I like the trick with the glass. And it's like, they're not going to get excited of telling people about a trick with the glass. Like we had to make it so clear and amazing that they would talk about it. Does that make sense? So it's the same thing, whatever you're doing, whoever is watching this, and I'm talking to you, whoever is watching this, what you're doing has to be, you have to make it so easy for people to talk about, and so exciting for them to talk about, that they can talk about it and they will talk about it. I don't care what you're selling, a product, a service, doesn't matter.
So this is so good. What are the questions that you would ask post show to refine? Because I think, I know for me, when I know when something is astonishing like that, and when something's like, that was cool, but maybe a little unclear. Like, you can, at least I can feel it. So what are the kinds of questions that you ask yourself, or in a business, or in the show, to create that clarity and astonishment?
Yeah. So often, I'm trying to think about, well, I'll just say a bunch of things. So when you differentiate or you position, it's almost always in opposition to something else, right? Because if you were in a field by itself, if your product or service was by itself, all you would need to do is to explain what it was. You wouldn't need to position it, because its existence was its position.
Right.
But if you're in a crowded field, like let's say you're a coach, or you're doing a product or something like that, and there are others in their field, so you're going against people's expectations of what they think that field is already. So one exercise that I have people do, that I first learned from a friend of mine a decade ago, Michelle Noret, is the idea of, I have people think in two categories, in two ways. I say, first, imagine people are coming to your service. And so, Vanessa, your service is what? Your coach.
Coach,
right? What, a life coach? What kind of a coach?
Yeah.
Life coach. So I would say, imagine that someone is coming to see you, and they don't know your work whatsoever. They just know that you're a life coach, but they don't know you. But they may have worked with a life coach before, or they may have researched it. They may have read some books on life coaching. So they have assumptions about what life coaches do and what they say. And you could call those assumptions stereotypes about what a life coach is going to charge, what the sessions are going to be like, what the deliverables are, like all that stuff. They may be wrong in your case, but they still have these stereotypes. So let's think, what are all the stereotypes? So I might tell them, let's get all the stereotypes out. What are the things they think you're going to say about life coaching and your work with them? And then, so that's the first category. Then the second category is, what are all the differences? Like, what are all the ideas, insights, stories, like all the different things about your business that are different from the stereotype. By the way, some of the stereotypes may be accurate.
Yeah.
Right? You know, like I'm a positioning guy. So someone might say, oh, I know positioning guys. He's going to tell me I need to create my own category so I can own it. And it's like, yeah, I am going to tell you that. Like, that's a stereotype and I fit that, you know, a very accurate stereotype. But many times the stereotypes are wrong. So like, what are all the ways you're different from the stereotypes? And from those differences, we may find the big difference, the big sexy idea, or we may be able to take one of those differences. Maybe it's different enough as is, or maybe we can blow it up into something much bigger and manufacture something bigger from it. Does that make sense? So that would be an example. What is it they think your field is, and what are all the ways you're different? Along with that is the idea of sometimes people get stuck in thinking about their product or service or their business or so. So I tend to try to relax them so that they think better. And so one of the things I do is I get them to tell me everything that's obvious about your work. It's like, okay, Vanessa, like, tell me about what's like, it doesn't matter how obvious, like it can be stupidly, like boringly obvious. Just tell me stuff. And often when people talk about what's obvious, it so relaxes them that they start coming up with insights. I can't tell you how common it is for me to be talking to someone about obvious stuff. And then they say, well, wait a minute, I never thought about this before. And then they go there. So you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, it sounds like when you're writing and you're self-editing before you actually get the ideas out on paper. And so you get into that place where you're just you're stuck and you're like, oh, I don't know why I can't figure out what to say. And then you just start writing the worst, crappiest writing you can imagine. And all of a sudden the good stuff starts flowing.
Right. Well, in a book that I wrote, Accidental Genius, I have it somewhere. Oh yeah, there it is. Accidental Genius. See, I have props.
Show us.
Right.
A good magician always has props, right?
Right, exactly. So this Accidental Genius, using writing to generate your best ideas, insight, and content. It's about using free writing as a means of coming up with your best business ideas. So in that book, I talk about, I think I call it something like the 27th idea. And I talk about the 27th idea that you come up with may be your best idea, but you won't know that until you get to the 27th idea. But by the way, what is much more likely to happen is you need to get to idea 45. And then by seeing idea 45, then you say, wait a minute, there's a point of diminishing returns. I'm seeing that this stuff stinks. But now I realize that idea I had a while back is the real idea. And so now let me go back. And then you get to the 27th idea. In retrospect, you go back to it. But you always have to produce more than you're going to use. Again, in that book, I have a chapter called 100 Ideas is Better Than One Idea. And it's because with one idea, if you're going to create one idea, that idea has to be very dear and very calculated and very perfect and all these kinds of things. And that makes it really difficult to come up with an idea. Whereas if you have to come up with 100 ideas, that's impossible. Yeah. So you have to relax who you are and what you're going to do. And you start pumping out the ideas. And that's when you come up with something good. It reminds me, years ago, there was a book I read about, I think by one person at least was a sculptor. Maybe they were both sculptors. I think it was called Art and Fear. I don't remember the writers' names. And they talked about a study that they conducted. And one of them was a professor at a college, and they were teaching art. And they had two classes. And they did secretly, they did this experiment. They told one class, they said, your grade, all of you in the class, the whole class only has to come up with one piece of pottery. You don't have to, like, you all just not one each, but one together. And the only thing is that piece of pottery's got to be damn good, because all your grades are going to be based on that piece of pottery. So it's got to be really great. But when you get that piece of pottery, you can like sit here and read. It doesn't matter to me. The other class, they said, look, I don't care about the quality of the work whatsoever. You're going to be graded on volume. So you need to churn out the pottery. Like if you give me a mound of pottery, you're going to get an A. If you just give me a few pieces, I'm going to fail you. It doesn't matter how good they are. And so at the end of the course, the guy said the people who were supposed to produce one perfect piece of pottery, like produce nothing, or they produced something horrible and they had a horrible experience. And the class that produced the volume both got A's for the volume. They produced a huge amount and they produced the best quality work. Both. So volume and quality came from volume. What are you going to say?
And what do you attribute that to?
Oh, you know, when you're producing volume, you don't know what's going to work ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And it's just that one idea leads to the next one. So as long as you keep on churning out ideas, you can keep on producing new things. I'll sometimes be working with a client and we're trying to create something. And then we get to a point and they'll say, okay, do you have anything else? Like I'll say, okay, here's what I think's the most interesting. They'll say, is there anything else? And I'll say, I don't know. If you want something else, we need more input. Mm. Well, given the input that we've done, in my professional opinion, we've reached the conclusion of that's the sexiest thing here. Yeah. If you want to see if there's something better, add something to the pot. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it also kind of makes me think and wonder too, like if the first at least 10, let's say the first 5 ideas are just terrible ideas, right? They're just right. Because you're trying to think and you're not relaxed. So the first 5 are just the worst ideas ever. Maybe like the second 10 are not even your ideas. They're just like what you think are supposed to be the ideas and the influence that you've been receiving. And maybe the next 5 after that are what you think is going to work.
Right.
And then you start to actually get to ideas.
Right. You're saying that you're throwing out all these ideas, right? That they're really just stock for the idea pot.
Yeah. And I don't know, because I think about the difference between like thinking and creative thinking or creativity. And I think, you know, I imagine that if this is your brain, you've got this reservoir of just swirling ideas that you're familiar with, that you're used to seeing, you're used to hearing. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. They start talking about their Instagram. What am I supposed to post? It's copying, it's mimicking. And then you get into the perfectionist idea, the one good pot. What's the, you know, I'm wondering if that's all just in the way of like what the actual really magical, awesome, big, sexy ideas are, which come from a more relaxed, creative, unique place.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know, again, like some people, like the idea of, oh, what should I put up on Instagram or whatnot? I actually find it helpful to know what form I don't find that constrictive because I like to push back against any form. Mm. So it pays to me to know what the form is, so I know what the conventions are. So it gives me direction on how to subvert the conventions. Does that make sense? So some people say, oh, no, like it doesn't matter what the form is. It's like we want to create our own original voice. And like, to me, that's too big a directive because now we have the entire universe of ideas to create from. And that's just too big to start creating from. So you need to narrow it down. Otherwise, it'll frighten you into silence.
Well, it goes back to the idea that you mentioned before that differentiation is in opposition to something. And I think that's really valuable and useful because, if it's just anything in all the world of ideas, that is big.
Right. I remember there's a story from the early 1970s. E.L. Doctorow, who was a famous novelist, he's dead now, but he was a famous novelist back then. He had written some best-selling books, and now he had to write a new novel, and he didn't know what to write it on. but he lived like in Westchester somewhere, New York, New Rochelle or something like that. And so he just turned around to face his window, and he looked out of the window of his house, and I think he saw like either a brick from his house or trolley tracks or something that had been disused. And it made him think about what was this street like 70 years ago. Like, in other words, he had the universe to write about, and he was stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So he turned around and he looked at a brick, or he looked at disused trolley tracks. And it's like, okay, where I'm sitting, what might it have been like 70 years ago? And from that, he wrote a mega best-selling book, which became a movie called Ragtime, which was a huge monster hit. And it was all because he narrowed down what he was thinking about. Richard Hugo, the Seattle poet, who I think died in maybe 1980 or so, Richard Hugo said, you should write about small things, because if you have a big mind, it will show itself in small things.
Can you say more?
Yeah, that you should say more about it, or
repeat more about it. Yeah, or repeat it.
It's this idea of, sometimes people come to me and, big sexy idea. You've helped several people like change entire fields. And so like, let's change my field. And I'll say, okay, we can try, but it's probably too big a directive to start off with. Why don't we start small? Why don't we like try to change your block or something like that? And maybe that'll lead us to something. Because if it's something super, super big, probably other people have tried it already. So let's try in a different, like, I'm not saying that we're not going to try to change the world at large or so, but why don't we start small and see how we can change something smaller and see what we can learn about the larger world from this smaller thing. Does that make sense? And so to me, that's calming. That allows people to see things more playfully, other than, oh yeah, I want to create something that makes everyone $10 million and saves everyone's life. And it's like, okay, good luck to you. That's a little too scary for me,
So you're kind of, oh, no, please go on.
No, I was going to say, so it doesn't mean we won't get there or we won't try to get there, but let's start instead of saving people's lives, let's get them, let's come up with a new bandage first.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, and I know you worked with Simon Sinek, and you mentioned that when you started, it wasn't who he is now. Did you find that was his idea too big and you narrowed it down?
No, he's a genius. I'm trying to see how to relate it to, sometimes people just need to bounce ideas off someone else, who asks them a few clarifying questions or gets them to look in a different way in order to see something like super cool.
Yeah.
That doesn't resonate with me, that it was too big.
Toss it.
Yeah.
So when you find that you get that clarity and you actually narrow it down, how does that, what impact does that have on your ability as the service or product provider to make that bigger impact? How do those two things connect?
Can you repeat that? I don't fully understand.
Yeah. So if you're, let's say you're a coach, because a lot of the people who watch this are coaches or entrepreneurs, how does narrowing it down in this way actually allow you to create a bigger impact?
Well, something that comes to mind instantly, and this is not a story of mine, this is a friend of mine, Michael. He years ago, this was like 15 years ago, there was a woman who came to him who was a coach, and she was a leadership coach. She may have been a great leadership coach, but she was just like a regular leadership coach. But she also had some kind of illness, forgive me for not remembering what it is, but some kind of chronic illness or some kind of degenerative illness or something like that. And so what they did was they changed her practice around around for people with chronic, how to like do a brilliant job at your work despite having a chronic illness. And from that, her business took off. She was like on TV. She was written about and so, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that would be an example of the number of people who have chronic illnesses in the workplace. There may be millions, but it's got to be a lot smaller than the population. So they instantly cut down who her audience was dramatically in numbers, but it made her come to the fore more because she became the one that people would think about. Right?
Yeah. So if I'm understanding it, it's that if the old adage, if you're speaking to everyone, you're reaching no one kind of thing. Does it give people just an opportunity to relate to you in a way that just connects to them more intimately?
Yeah. They, and by the way, so the interesting thing, so no one has really ever asked me that question. And so the reason why I'm hesitating, and this is important, right? For everyone listening, I could have just answered that question like immediately. But the reason why I paused for a second was I thought, what can I say about this that most people haven't heard? Right? That's what you need to do to draw attention. It's what do I know that they don't know? Yeah. Or what do I know that 80% of them that don't know? Or what do I know that they may know, but they just haven't thought to say? Yeah. So when I'd say it, they'd say, oh, wow, I knew that, but I never thought to say it. That reminds, so it's like, what is it that I know that they don't know? So when I'm creating a brand, or I'm creating a company, or I'm creating a book, or I'm creating a speech or something, I always use the what do I know that they don't know. It doesn't have to be the entirety of the thing. But if you only give people what it is that they already expected, they have no reason to listen to you and they'll turn away. Yeah. So it is essential that you seed your conversation or your marketing materials or your book or your speech or your pitch with things that wake them up that they don't know. It gets them to pay attention. So it's not a nicety, it is essential. So what do I know that they don't know? So what you had said is, and I still don't know what I'm going to say, but I'll just say the question out loud to bide myself more time. You said, why is it that that if you narrow, that it creates, I think, well, for one reason, by narrowing what it is you do, it makes you seem much more expert in it. Like, why would you narrow? Like if I said, I'm a mechanic for Audis, for Audi automobiles, like you're going to assume I'm a really good mechanic for Audi automobiles, because why would I mention that? Like, let's say I knew nothing about Audis or whatnot. Like, why would I mention that? So the whole fact that I decided to define myself by this smaller thing probably speaks to an expertise about it. Yeah. Also, by the way, when you define yourself in a smaller way, your expertise on one thing, the halo effect comes in. People assume that if you're expert in one thing, that you're likely expert in other things too. So they come to you for that. I've seen that happen in many, many, many instances, that people think that they're reducing their field to something that's too small when the audience, like larger groups of people, start to come to them because they say, oh, wow, if they can do this for that group, I bet you it's nothing to do it for my group too.
So that's fascinating. I mean? That's really fascinating, because that is like, oh, I don't want to like box myself in over here.
Right. Oh, yeah. You should be able to use the entirety of who you are and what you've done in life in what you're doing. It's just when you differentiate about a big, sexy idea, you're taking something that it's like a foot in the door. It doesn't mean that you have to get, there was a client of mine, Lisa McLeod, who was a consultant and a sales trainer. And she hired me and I worked with her for a while. And very quickly we discovered, like Lisa had said, remember, she was a sales consultant. She said, I want to restore the nobility to the sales profession. And I remember laughing when she said that. That's why I remembered that. It was in conversation and I laughed. And she also talked about, she wasn't just talking about trial closes and things like salespeople often talk about. She was talking about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and she was talking about liberty. She was talking about all these things. And I said, okay, here's what your thing is. You help people sell with your thing is selling with noble purpose. It's not just about trying to make money on sales quotas. It's trying to get people to sell like about some higher ideal for society. And so like, blah, blah. So anyway, where that led to Selling with Noble Purpose, which was a bestseller, Leading with Noble Purpose, like all these things. Wow. She became, she was always a brilliant speaker, but she became like a defining headliner. Like, and I forget the question. I was bringing up Lisa for what was the question you had said I had forgotten, or the.
I was just the saying that like what you're afraid that when you narrow, you're going to box yourself in.
Oh yeah. That you're afraid. I forget now why I brought up Lisa. Lisa, I gave you a good plug there. I don't remember why I brought you up.
No, I get the relevance. I get the relevance because it didn't limit and restrict what you were able to create and the reach you're able to have. It creates something that has you be not worth hiring, but like it has you stand out. It has people understand like what they're hiring you for.
Right. Well, and a smart person is a smart person. So it's like if they're super smart at this, as long as this is within the same category of work, I bet you they're smart at that too.
Yes.
Right. If you jump, like, if I say I'm this mechanic for Audi cars, you're not going to assume I'm an expert baker. But you might assume I'm also an expert for other European cars.
Yes.
Like that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just kind of round this conversation out with what's the question I want to ask? It would be awesome to know. Let me think for a second.
Sure.
Okay. This is just actually I learned this one from Steve Chandler. So if you don't like
who I love, I adore Steve Chandler.
If you had to give a 1-second talk on differentiation, the one-word talk, what would it be?
Surprise.
Great answer.
There's no other. It's, what do I know about this that the person I'm speaking to would find surprising? Because if they're surprised, right, it means you've defeated their I'm using these aggressive words. I don't mean it that way, but it's like you probably got them to laugh. You probably got them really interested. You probably gave them an insight that they hadn't expected before, and now they're going to want to learn more. So surprise is the way to go.
I love it. That's great. So if people want to have know you more, use your services,
sure,
learn more about differentiation, where can they do it?
Sure. So my website is levyinnovation.com. That's Levy and then the word innovation with no S at the end, levyinnovation.com. So all my contact information is there. And I've also wrote a bunch of books. My favorite book is Accidental Genius, Using Writing to Generate Your Best Ideas, Insights, and Content. And so what it does, when it came out, it was the first book of its kind. It showed you how to use free writing or private writing, fast journaling, spontaneous writing as a means to solve your dearest business problems that you couldn't solve any other way. So that book's been in 11 languages. It's sold, like 100,000 copies, something like that. So I still love that book. Accidental Genius is a good place to look at.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. I feel like we could, I almost like want to come back and talk about like magic.
Right.
So maybe we'll have to do that too.
Right. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Vanessa, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate it.
All right.